I didn't kill Stu. Al Capone did. But I have killed other men. The one you know about, the 3 that attacked me, and my partner.
Your what?
I was a prohibition agent. I drowned him with my bare hands. My name isn't Mueller. I'm not legally married to my wife. I used to believe in God, but now I don't believe in anything at all.
Nelson Van Alden had one of the craziest stories in television show history. He was a very complex character, to say the least. He goes from a religious prohibition officer to an iron seller to Dean O'Banion's flower boy, and then he becomes muscle for Al Capone. And in this video, we're going to talk about all of that and more as we look at the story of Nelson Van Alden in Boardwalk Empire. If you enjoy content like this, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more of my videos in the future. I would really appreciate it. But it's your boy Evan loud and clear. I want to thank you all for being here. Let's get into it. Now I do have to say, Van Alden was a good prohibition officer for the time that he was one. The first time we see Nelson, we see how well prepared he is at the meeting of all the bosses in the first episode. Nelson knows all the big players and the kind of clothes they're wearing. He knew exactly where and when they would be meeting as well. He knows exactly where to find Nucky as he lets himself into Nucky's suite. This was Nucky and Nelson's first time speaking. Van Alden informs Nucky that he's investigating the shootings that happened with Jimmy and Al Capone. You can tell by Nucky's reaction when Van Alden leaves that Nucky knows Van Alden won't be bought and he could be a problem, and he was right. One of the guys Jimmy robbed was still alive, so Nelson decides to kidnap the witness and try to keep him alive so he would talk. Nelson stops at a dentist and forces the dentist to give the witness cocaine to keep him awake. With a little extra persuasion from Van Alden, the witness tells him Jimmy was one of the shooters. But before Nelson could get to Jimmy, Jimmy left for Chicago, but we'll get back to that. Nelson was most definitely causing issues within Atlantic City. He had Mickey Doyle's warehouse raided, which landed Mickey in jail. And with the help of Margaret, he had Jim Neary arrested at the Celtic dinner. Margaret didn't know it yet, but she became a big part in Nelson's life. Nelson seems to start focusing less on bootleggers and focusing more on Margaret. He's asking her about her relationship with Nucky, going to her house looking for her, and he was looking into her immigration files. Now this scene showed us just exactly how different Nelson Van Alden was. He starts lashing himself in the back with a belt, but the strange thing is, he's looking at a picture of Margaret the whole time. Now I really thought about why he did this. Nelson was a religious man, and he was having temptations, and maybe to relieve himself of those temptations, he lashed himself. This was actually a real practice by the Roman Catholics in the 13th century. It was called self-flagellation, and it was seen as a spiritual cleansing of one's sins. But as for Nelson looking at Margaret's picture while doing it, I believe after Nelson found out from the neighbor that she was with Nucky, he found her to be evil and full of sin. So the self-inflicted pain was a way of associating Margaret with sin. Begin in the comment section and let me know why you think Nelson did that to himself. We then meet Van Alden's wife Rose for the first time. Rose is also very religious, and we find out that she unfortunately can't have a child. This is very hard for her, and this causes Nelson to make some mistakes, but we'll get to that later on. There was actually a third man in the robbery with Jimmy and Al, Billy. Billy got caught by the feds for something else, and he told Van Alden that he would give Jimmy up to get out of it. Nucky was in a war with Arnold Rothstein and needed Jimmy back in Atlantic City. A few days after Jimmy gets back, he's tracked down by Van Alden and his partner Agent Sebso. With Jimmy in custody and Billy willing to testify against him, it seemed like Van Alden was going to send Jimmy to prison and be one step closer to Nucky. Agent Sebso then came up with the idea to move Billy out of the reach of Nucky and drove him up to New York. Sebso actually killed Billy and made it look like Billy attacked him. This let us know that Sebso was a dirty agent who was working for Nucky Thompson. Van Alden was infuriated and didn't buy the story of self-defense one bit. Jimmy was released and all roads to Nucky were once again blocked for Agent Van Alden. He went back to someone he thought very highly of and someone who was close to Nucky, Margaret. Yeah, she was about to find out how much she meant to Nelson. Nelson told Margaret that he would offer her salvation, and that when he looks at her picture at night, he sees a life with the girl in the picture. That shit is creepy as hell, bro. And that was the very last of Van Alden as we knew him. He was the prohibition officer who would never drink, right? Well, after Margaret turns down his salvations, we find Nelson at a bar drinking whiskey. Look at his face right here after he drinks for the first time, y'all. He looks fulfilled. He looks like he's just tasted something that he's really needed for a long time. And we as fans can start to see his character change into the character that we know. So my man gets a little buzz going, and who does he see at the bar? Lucy. Now, I talk a bit about her character in my Facts About Boardwalk Empire video, so check that out when you're done watching this. Lucy was Nucky's old mistress who got replaced by Margaret, and she was an absolute nightmare, y'all. I gotta be honest, I'm at a point now, I just skip her scenes, y'all. I gotta be honest, they're too painful. And seeing her and Nelson converse was painful as well. It's very ironic that they would end up together at that point in time. Nucky had just broken up with Lucy, and Margaret had just turned down Nelson's salvations, so we kinda knew they were gonna eventually hook up at the bar, but we'll get back to them later on. Agent Sebso wanted to get back in the good graces of Van Alden for killing their witness. Nucky gives Sebso the location of an unknown still that he takes Van Alden to go raid. Instead, they come up on a church gathering, and Van Alden insists that Sebso get baptized. Nelson does the baptism himself and ends up drowning Sebso in front of the entire church group. We then see Nelson contemplating stepping down as lead investigator in Atlantic City. But then, right as he is packing his things, in comes Lucy, and in possibly one of the biggest oh shit moments in the show, she tells Nelson that he got her pregnant. So at the beginning of the show, we had Nelson Van Alden, the religious, straight-edge, honest prohibition officer. And at the end of season 1, he's now a drinker, a cheater, and a murderer. But this was just the beginning of Nelson Van Alden's crazy character change, because honestly, it only gets crazier from here, y'all. At the beginning of season 2, Nelson's wife Rose comes to Atlantic City to visit. All that really happens is Nelson busts a restaurant for their booze while they're out to eat, and then Rose leaves. As soon as Rose leaves, we see Nelson at an apartment with a pregnant Lucy. We find out that Nelson intends to give the child to Rose, who can't have children of her own. He was also going to give Lucy $3,000 for being a surrogate. And I gotta say, y'all, I hated Lucy's character, but I couldn't help but feel bad for her in these scenes, man. Nelson really didn't care that she was in pain physically or mentally. She even stated that she felt like she was in jail, and I agree with her. Nelson actually does something somewhat nice and gets her a record player. And when she asks who it was from, the delivery men say Mueller, and I believe that was one of the first times Nelson used the name George Mueller. Van Alden then returned home to see that Lucy had given birth to their daughter. Nelson then goes to get a doctor for her. When he returns with the doctor, he notices some things different about his apartment. The lemons are in a bowl, the broken dish has been cleaned up, and Lucy's gown is soaking in the sink. Nelson then goes to the room to see his wife Rose caring for Lucy. He tries explaining that the child is for her, but Rose ain't trying to hear that. And after biting Nelson, she runs out of the apartment, and that's the last time that we see Rose. Nelson is then confronted by Lucy for the money that he owes her, which we all know he didn't have. That led Lucy to do something that wouldn't be good for Nelson. She went to see Nucky. Bro, that shit was hilarious. My man Nucky knew exactly when the last time he saw Lucy was, so she couldn't say that he was the father. Nucky then meets with Van Alden and attempts to blackmail him. He also lets Nelson know that he gave Lucy money, and that is very bad for Nelson. He goes to his apartment to find Lucy gone and his daughter in the hands of their neighbor. And now we can add father to the list of things Nelson is, and that is a scary, scary thought. My man Van Alden moves fast though, and hires a new nanny, Sigrid, which he later marries. Nelson was working with Esther Randolph to put together a case against Nucky Thompson. Van Alden was going to testify against Nucky, but one of his sins came back to haunt him. Nucky's butler, Harlan, was part of the church group that saw Van Alden drown Sebso, and he informed Nucky and his lawyer. The next time Nelson went into work, he was confronted by Esther, Nucky's lawyer, and the deacon of the church. Nelson shoots one of the officers in the foot and makes his escape. Now, Nelson Van Alden becomes George Mueller and starts his journey as a fugitive. Nelson relocates to Cicero and starts a life as an electric iron salesman. He goes door to door trying to sell these things, just like he used to go door to door to get statements from people when he was a proie. He has a moment that he's staring in the mirror, repeating, "Every day, I'm getting better and better." Now, I don't know if he's talking about getting better as a salesman or as a man in general, but I think it's safe to say that he wasn't getting better as either. He continues trying to sell irons and stumbles into Dean O'Banion's flower shop when Al Capone was confronting him. Dean acted like Van Alden was part of his crew. His size and poker face made Al Capone leave. Dean then offered Van Alden a real job if he was interested. Nelson then goes to a bar with some of his coworkers. For the first time, he sees what it's like to be on the other side of the law as the bar they're at gets raided by Prohibition officers. The Prohibition officer who approaches Nelson recognizes him from living in the same neighborhood. He tells Nelson to pay the fine to him directly, and Nelson says, "Pay it to you." And I think at that moment, Nelson is realizing that his past profession wasn't as honest as he once thought it was. Look at all the proes we've seen so far. Agent Sebso worked for Nucky. Agent Sawicki, now working for Nucky. Agent Clarkson, very unfortunate what happened to him. And then we have Nelson. All the proes eventually get compromised. The agent from the bar visits Nelson at his house. Nelson thought that the agent was there to extort him, and apparently his wife did as well, cause she lays this dude out, bro. Now this scene ain't as much about Van Alden as it is his wife, Sigrid. We find out that she knows about Van Alden's past already and doesn't care. She thinks he's a good man and is so devoted to him that she would kill someone. Now, Nelson was left with a body in his apartment. He had to get rid of it somehow. So who does he go see? Dean O'Banion. Dean gets rid of the body for him, and in exchange, Nelson starts distilling whiskey in his apartment. Now, I think we gotta talk about the de-evolution of Nelson Van Alden for a minute, y'all. His story really just keeps getting worse and worse. The former honest pro-he was now distilling whiskey in his own apartment. It's crazy, man. Some of Van Alden's colleagues liked to break his balls at work. His flatline personality and non-existent sense of humor made him an easy target. One day, he just had enough. He took an iron to one of his coworkers' faces, leaving him badly burned. He then destroys the office, moving like a robot, terrorizing everyone. And look at his face right here, y'all. Michael Shannon does an absolutely incredible job of displaying the sick and twisted mind of Van Alden in this one shot of him smirking. Nelson's wife, Sigrid, comes up with the idea that they should sell some whiskey on the side. While Nelson was out selling that whiskey, he accidentally tried selling in Al Capone's territory, which landed him face to face with Al. Al told Nelson that he wanted to know everything about O'Banion's operation. Meanwhile, O'Banion told Van Alden that he wanted him to stay close to the Capones and tell him everything about their operation. So Van Alden was playing the double agent for O'Banion and Al Capone. It really came down to who Nelson was more afraid of, honestly. And speaking of his de-evolution, in the beginning of the show, he was a strong-minded alpha male who really wouldn't take shit from anyone. He had now turned into a weak-minded pushover. Nelson was used to being the one giving the orders, not taking them. He spent the next few episodes cracking heads with Al Capone and his brother Frank. Frank even tells Nelson to pick a winner between them and O'Banion, and Nelson does just that, but not before him, Frank, and Al take one of O'Banion's flower trucks on a little joyride. What's crazy was, the same guy who was shooting pots with Van Alden and O'Banion earlier in the season was actually in the back of the truck. He saw Van Alden with the Capone, so yeah, he had to go. Nelson tried shooting him, but his gun jammed, and then Al Capone absolutely lights this dude up. Al Capone's character was crazy in this show, y'all. So get in the comment section and let me know if Al Capone's a character you'd be interested in seeing a video about. Throughout their short time spent together, Van Alden and Frank Capone seemed to get along. Frank told Van Alden that if he followed him, he would be taken care of. That was until a brawl broke out on election day. There was a moment where it looked like Van Alden was about to shoot Al in the back, but Frank saw him, and before Frank could pull out his gun, he was gunned down by the cops. O'Banion sent Van Alden to the Capones with flowers in condolence for Frank's death. When he got there, he was questioned by Ralph and Al about O'Banion's operation. Nelson agreed to kill O'Banion. Right when he was about to walk in and kill O'Banion, his past caught up to him once again. Remember when Nelson burnt his co-worker's face? Well, him and two others tracked Nelson down and started to beat him. Nelson pulled out his gun and in a very relaxed way shot all three of them. But because this happened, Nelson didn't have a chance to kill O'Banion and decided to wait until closing. Nelson then had some men come in and shoot O'Banion, but I think we really gotta pay attention to what Van Alden said to Dean right before he got killed. He told O'Banion he's killed many times before, that he used to be a prohibition officer, and that he no longer believes in God. It's absolutely incredible to think about the person Nelson was in season 1 and to see just how far into darkness he's fallen. I believe that him setting up Dean O'Banion and giving up his beliefs in God made his character change complete. He was now just a full-blown soldier for the Capones. He proved his loyalty to Al by saving him from an assassination attempt, and because of this, he got a bigger role in Al's operation. In the final season, there's a new member in Al's operation, Eli Thompson. After killing Agent Knox in Atlantic City, he had to leave and went to Chicago. I gotta say, y'all, these scenes with Eli and Nelson were absolute gold. The pure hatred they had for one another was hilarious. Between their pasts, where Van Alden was a proie and Eli was sheriff, and of course, when Eli sleeps with Van Alden's wife, but they were forced to work with each other nonetheless. Lucky Luciano then comes to town in an effort to organize organized crime. While in Al Capone's office, he notices Van Alden and exposes him as an agent. In Van Alden's explanation, he doesn't exactly say if he was or wasn't an agent, but he says that he's been loyal to Al, and because of that, Al lets him live. Unfortunately for Nelson, he was now exposed to Mike D'Angelo, who was really an undercover agent. D'Angelo told Nelson and Eli that he needed Al Capone's ledger books in order to make a case against him for tax evasion. Van Alden and Eli come up with a dumbass plan to get the ledger books from the count room, but of course, they get caught. Al puts a gun to Van Alden's head for like the 50th time in the show, and Van Alden has one final moment of pride when he charges Al Capone and tells him who he really is. He is then shot in the back of the head by D'Angelo. Nelson was most likely seconds away from blowing D'Angelo's cover, so he kinda had to kill him right there. Nelson Van Alden had one of the most unpredictable storylines in television show history. You never knew what was gonna happen with this guy. From pro-he to murderer to thief to bootlegger, the list just goes on and on. Michael Shannon was absolutely brilliant in this role, and this video was cool as hell to do, y'all, but I think it's finally time to wrap it up. I got some ideas on the next characters I'd like to do a video on, but get in the comments and let me know whose story you would like to see a video about. I'd like to thank y'all for watching the video, and if you enjoyed the video, give your boy a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more of my videos in the future. I would really appreciate it. But it's your boy Evan, loud and clear. I'm out of here.